there is no requirement for aid organizations to send people that have qualifications. It's up to the aid organizations themselves to decide what their staff should know and what their staff should not know. So there's no international rules or regulations that say if you want to involve yourself in saving lives in an African country, then the least you should know is this and this and this. It's up to the aid organizations themselves. So does that answer your question? Yeah.
Are you actually advocating for a code of conduct?
For NGOs?
For NGOs?
There are plenty of, there are maybe 17 codes of conduct. The problem is that those codes of conduct are not binding.
Now, would you favor a binding code of conduct, international binding code of conduct for NGOs? Would you really say that? I have to, in my opinion, it would be disastrous, to be honest.
Why?
An international, just imagine, I mean, you describe the world as it is, including in the UN. The UN mirrors authoritarianism, yeah? And just, I mean, NGOs in the UN play an important role just because of their spontaneity, because they are independent organizations, yeah? Not all of them are good ones. So they need competition also among themselves in order to find out who can do what. So one needs to also a critical assessment by NGOs on NGOs, but not an international binding code of conduct. It would really be disastrous. I mean, it would add another component of authoritarianism to international politics. I mean, I don't understand what you are favoring, but it really rings all my alarm bells, if I understood you correctly. Saying that you're really in favor of an international binding code of conduct for NGOs, right?
There are plenty. There are plenty.
Binding.
No, this is the problem. That aid organizations can make up codes of conduct. They can tell us that they are acting according codes of conduct, but they're not binding. So if they abandon their own codes of conduct, which the codes of conduct they establish many different things. They establish accountability. They establish the way of fundraising. They establish how much money you can spend on your own organization, etc. So the codes of conduct are very various, etc. But they're not binding, and this is a problem. If an aid organization decides to stop following a code of conduct, it can do so, which means that aid organizations who do abide to the codes of conduct do not get the right incentive to stick with the codes of conduct, because there is no punishment for leaving your own codes of conduct.
Who should punish? Who should exercise control?
These are very interesting questions.
They are not just interesting. I mean, those are the questions. If you really favor a binding code of conduct, you have to answer this question. Who should do it? Who should exercise control? Who should do accreditation? Who should exercise punishment? I mean, I have to say, I'm very much in favor of self-control mechanism in a diversity, plurality of NGOs. It might not work perfectly, but I mean, any alternative would really play into the hands of authoritarian regimes. If you look what Russia is doing with NGOs, I mean, it's always control, 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 and one tool and one pretext of exercising control is controlling the money. So foreign donors, things like this. I mean, it's such a tricky thing. And you are glossing over these questions, I mean, by advocating for something which I don't understand. Yeah? I think it's disastrous, what you are proposing. Unless I understand what you really have in mind. I don't see it. I don't see your point. I see the problem. But I'm not convinced that your response goes into the right direction. I'm very much skeptical about what you are saying.
I am asking the questions. I don't.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't have to find a solution for this world. But there is an example I would like to give you. There is the Geneva Code, for example. And humanitarian organizations are supposed to abide by the Geneva Articles. Yes. Inside the Geneva Articles, they describe many things, but inside the Geneva Articles, there is an article that says that an aid organization must do everything in its power to prevent its aid being abused by warring factions. This is one code of conduct that aid organizations themselves say, yes, we will obey on this one. And they're not, because there's nobody checking whether they do or not. But it's a good code of conduct. Yes, but if you decide not to do everything in your power to prevent your aid being abused, nobody can drag you to court for that. It is happening, and it is part of what aid organizations call collateral damage of their work. But the codes of conduct are there, and some of them are very good. So it is a pity that there is no mechanism in place to make NGOs obey their own codes of conduct, not the Russian states, but their own codes of conduct.
Okay, let's leave that there. We can come back to it if we want to. We've got some more questions, but I'm going to open it up so that you can ask questions of anyone now. Yes, who's got their hands up? I haven't seen. No, I think one down here. Yes.
I have experiences from the consumer movement. And there is, for instance, a code of conduct published by the International Standardization Organization. We worked, also the consumers, had to participate in the development of this document. We worked on it for maybe 10 years or so. And also there is no formal possibility of punishment, but a very dominant factor is competition, and you have mentioned competition among aid organizations. So either the aid organizations are putting up a coalition of themselves, or they act in the name of competition against the bad behavior. And I'm sure that would be effective, because the good name of the public apprehension of an organization is very risky if as we say in consumer movement, you name it and you shame it. If there is publicity about some organization which does not obey its own code of conduct, then great damage is done to that organization.
So what you're saying is that the aid world itself could do the naming and the shaming, and the aid world itself could regulate itself. But there has to be a sanction for aid organizations that do not, they either have to be pushed out and be named and shamed, or they have to be rewarded. Yeah, by the aid world itself. Yes, yes, possible. Yes.
Isn't the bad publicity that would come from your own profession
that's
it. Enough? Yes. If it was established that a particular aid organisation was paying too much to the warlords or sitting on money rather than share it with another able agency, I think we don't need that. Yes. Who's next, John?
I think it is him.
Okay, righto.
Around the time of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, there was a saying I heard says, freedom is never voluntarily granted by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed.
Right.
Could you comment on that?
That's for you, is it?
I don't know. But I couldn't agree more. Of course, I mean, human rights have always been a battlefield. Yeah? And that's the idea. It's not, let's say, about lofty standards, self-executing lofty standards. It's about mobilizing people. I mean, the very roots are experiences of injustice that are publicly articulated. So it's the public sphere in which peaceful, hopefully peaceful, conflicts take place over, first, the understanding of what human rights are, and then the way they should be implemented. Yeah? So, and I would say we have come a long way. I would insist, even in times of postmodernism, that the old-fashioned notion of progress cannot be abandoned. We have to describe progress in a very, let's say, sober way. It's not the Hegelian concept of progress of humankind, of progress in morality, but institution building. So, fighting over human rights by building broad alliances and by institutionalizing claims. I mean, these institutions are never self-executing. So, they always require a critical audience, critical media, critical discourse. But, I mean, if human rights can make a difference, it's because of this institution building mechanisms. And I would say, for all the criticism of the international human rights infrastructure, it works slightly better than its reputation is. Only slightly better. I'm not making big propaganda things.
Good. And question down here.